At my retirement toast, my husband handed me divorce papers. I won't support a jobless old woman. My kids clapped eager for his inheritance. I signed without reading and left. What they didn't know was that I had just walked away from the best revenge of my life. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. The ballroom at the Greenwich Country Club held 200 people that night. My colleagues, my board members, my assistant of 22 years, the interns I had mentored into executives 35 years at Hartwell Industries, the last 12 as chief financial officer. I had helped build that company from a 200 million regional player into a 4.7 billion multinational. The retirement party was Margaret's idea. Margaret Chen, our CEO, my closest friend in the corporate world, she'd insisted on the grand send-off, the open bar, the jazz quartet. You deserve this, Evelyn. 35 years. Let them celebrate you. I wore the navy Armani suit I'd bought for my first board presentation in 1994. It still fit. I'd had it tailored twice over the decades, but the bones were the same. Richard used to say I looked powerful in that suit. He stopped saying things like that around year 15. Richard sat at the head table with our children. Brandon, 34, in a suit that cost more than my first car. Melissa, 31, in a dress I'd paid for last month. They both worked in consulting, which meant they cashed the monthly checks I deposited into their accounts and occasionally took meetings that never led anywhere. Richard hadn't worked in 10 years. He'd been a mid-level marketing manager when we met, charming and ambitious. The ambition faded around the time our daughter started kindergarten. He became a consultant too, which meant golf on Tuesdays and Thursdays lunch, at the club on Wednesdays, and a complete lack of interest in anything I accomplished. Margaret gave a beautiful speech. She talked about my first day nervous and overdressed. She talked about the acquisition that saved the company in 2008. She talked about the glass ceiling I'd cracked for every woman who came after me. I cried. I actually cried standing at that podium, looking at the faces of people who had become my family more than my family ever had. Then Richard stood up. I'd like to say a few words about my wife. Margaret looked at me. I shrugged. Richard rarely attended my work functions. When he did, he sulked in corners and complained about the catering. He walked to the podium with a manila envelope in his hand. His smile was strange, too wide, too practiced. Brandon and Melissa exchanged a glance I didn't understand. Evelyn and I have been married for 36 years, Richard said. 36 years of watching her climb the corporate ladder while I held down the fort at home. A few polite chuckles. Richard's idea of holding down the fort was instructing the housekeeper and napping. But now that Evelyn is retiring, now that she'll be home full-time, I've realized something. He paused, his eyes finding mine. I won't support a jobless old woman. The room went silent. 200 people and not a sound except the jazz quartet trailing off mid-note. Richard opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of papers. These are divorce papers, Evelyn. I've already signed. I'd appreciate it if you do the same. I didn't move. I couldn't move. I was frozen at the head table, champagne flute in hand, watching my husband of 36 years publicly end our marriage at my retirement party. Not from the crowd, from my children. Brandon was applauding, a smirk on his face. Melissa joined in her expression, triumphant. They were applauding my humiliation. "Come on, Mom," Brandon called out. "Just sign it." We all know the marriage has been dead for years. Think of it as a fresh start, Melissa added. For everyone, I looked at my children, the babies I had nursed, the toddlers I had comforted, the teenagers I had driven to practices and recital and college tours. I looked at the people I had sacrificed for, worked for, provided for, and I saw strangers. Richard walked toward me, papers extended. Just sign Evelyn. Let's not make this more embarrassing than it needs to be. More embarrassing, as if anything could be more embarrassing than this. I took the papers. The room held its breath. Margaret started to rise from her seat, but I held up a hand. The papers were thick. Dozens of pages of legal language tabs marking signature lines. I didn't read them. I couldn't focus on the words, even if I'd wanted to. I pulled a pen from my jacket pocket, the Millant my father had given me when I graduated from business school, and I signed every page, every tab, initial signature date, over and over, mechanical and precise, while 200 people watched in horrified silence. When I finished, I set the papers on the table. Then I slid my wedding ring off my finger, the 2-carat diamond Richard had proposed with, back when he still believed in ambition and I still believed in him, and placed it on top of the stack. There you go, Richard. My voice was steady. You're free. I walked out of the ballroom without looking back. My heels clicked on the marble floor, echoing in the silence I left behind. I heard Margaret call my name, heard the murmur of voices resuming, heard someone, Melissa, I think, laugh. I didn't stop until I reached my car, the Lexus I'd bought myself for my 60th birthday, the first car I'd ever owned that Richard didn't help choose. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the steering wheel. 36 years of marriage, 2 children, a life I had built brick by brick, while working 60-hour weeks and flying $200,000 men a year. Gone in a ballroom with applause. I drove to the Del Mar Hotel in Southport, 20 minutes from our house in Greenwich. I checked in with my corporate card still active for another 2 weeks and asked for their best suite, celebrating something Mrs. Harper, the desk clerk, asked. In a way, I said I'm celebrating the end. The suite was beautiful. Harbor View King, bed, a bathroom bigger than my first apartment. I ordered room service and ate salmon and asparagus while watching the boats bob in the darkness. My phone had been buzzing since I left the party. I finally looked at it. 47 missed calls from Richard, 23 texts from Brandon, 15 texts from Melissa, 12 voicemails I didn't play, and 1 text from Margaret. Call me when you can. There's something you need to know. I turned off the phone and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke at 6:00, the way I always did, force of habit. After 35 years of early meetings and transcontinental flights, I ordered coffee and turned on the television looking for background noise, while I figured out what to do with the rest of my life. The local news was showing a business segment, and in corporate news, Hartwell Industries announced a historic retirement package for departing CFO Evelyn Harper. The $50 million severance is believed to be the largest in Connecticut corporate history and one of the largest ever awarded to a female executive. I stared at the screen. $50 million. Margaret had told me the package was generous. She'd mentioned a number, but I'd been distracted, focused on the transition plan for my replacement. I hadn't processed the actual figure, $50 million. My phone buzzed. I'd left it on the nightstand. Even though it was off somehow, it was buzzing. Wait, I'd plugged it in to charge overnight. It must have powered back on. 47 missed calls had become 112. As I watched, another call came in. Richard's face on the screen. The photo from our anniversary trip to Italy 3 years ago. The last time he'd smiled at me like he meant it. I declined the call. Another came in immediately. I sat on the hotel bed watching my husband's face appear and disappear on my phone screen over and over while the television explained that I was worth $50 million. 15 minutes and 37 calls later, I finally answered. Evelyn. Richard's voice was strangled. Evelyn, we need to talk. I don't think we do. I signed the papers. Remember the papers? Those papers. There's been a misunderstanding. What kind of misunderstanding? I didn't know about the severance package. Nobody told me it would be that much. So we need to renegotiate. Those papers aren't fair. I laughed. I actually laughed. Sitting in my hotel suite in my silk pajamas, looking at the harbor where the sun was just beginning to turn the water gold. Richard, you handed me divorce papers at my retirement party in front of 200 people. Our children applauded. They were excited. They didn't mean they called me a jobless old woman. That was taken out of context. You said you wouldn't support me. Exact words. Silence on the line. I could hear Richard breathing. That heavy nasal breath he'd developed after gaining 40 lb in his 50s. Evelyn, be reasonable. 36 years of marriage means something. It meant something to me right up until you humiliated me in front of everyone I've ever worked with. We can fix this. Just don't file those papers. Give me back the copies you signed and we'll start over. A fresh beginning. Couples counseling. Maybe a vacation. We've been drifting apart. I see that now. But $50 million is a lot of money. We should be managing it together. I looked at my phone at Richard's face frozen mid-smile in the photo. Then I called Margaret. You saw the news, she said, by way of greeting. I tried to tell you last week. You were so focused on the transition. Richard didn't know. Of course he didn't. You signed an NDA when the board approved the package. It wasn't public until this morning's press release. I thought about the timing, the retirement party, the divorce papers, the very next morning, the news, the divorce. He timed it before the announcement. He must have known something was coming, even if he didn't know the exact number. He wanted to lock me into an agreement before I knew what I was worth. Margaret was quiet for a moment. That would explain why he was so insistent on the quick settlement. His lawyer contacted ours 3 weeks ago asking about the timeline for your separation. They wanted to know if you'd be receiving any retirement compensation and when it would be finalized. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not grief, not even anger. Margaret. I need a lawyer, not a corporate lawyer, a divorce lawyer, the best one in Connecticut. I have a name, Rebecca Stone. She's handled some ugly situations. She's thorough. Thorough is what I need. I hung up and looked out the window at the harbor. Somewhere in Greenwich in the house I had paid for Richard was panicking. Somewhere my children were recalculating. I didn't know what those divorce papers said. I hadn't read them before I signed, but I was going to find out. And then I was going to make sure Richard got exactly what he deserved. Rebecca Stone's office was on the 37th floor of a glass tower in downtown Hartford. The view was spectacular. The woman herself was more so. She was 55, silver-haired, and dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Richard's monthly golf membership. Her handshake was firm. Her eyes missed nothing. I watched your retirement party on YouTube, she said as I sat across from her desk. Someone recorded it. Several people. It's had 40,000 views since yesterday. She turned her monitor toward me. Would you like to see I didn't want to see? I watched anyway. There I was in my Navy Armani suit accepting the papers from Richard. There were my children applauding. There was the moment I signed page after page, while the room watched in silence. I look calm, I said. You look devastated and dignified. The internet is on your side, Mrs. Harper. Everyone thinks your husband is a monster. He's not a monster. He's something worse. He's a calculating coward who planned this for maximum damage. Rebecca nodded. Let's talk about those papers you signed. She had already obtained copies from Richard's lawyer. They were spread across her desk, now marked with yellow tabs and red annotations. This is one of the most predatory divorce agreements I've ever seen, Rebecca said. And I've been practicing for 28 years. In summary, everything is his. I stared at her. Everything. The house, which I understand you paid for the vacation property in Vermont, the investment accounts, the retirement funds, both cars. She flipped through pages. There's a clause here, waiving any claim to future earnings or severance packages. Another one releasing him from any claim of fraud or misrepresentation. I signed all of that. You signed it without reading it. At a public event while emotionally distressed, Rebecca smiled, which is exactly why this agreement will never hold up in court. Mrs. Harper, your husband, presented these papers as a surprise, in a venue designed to humiliate and pressure you. You signed under duress without legal representation, without time to review, and there's something else. She pulled out a separate document. This is a financial disclosure form. It's supposed to list all marital assets and debts. It was filed with the divorce papers 3 weeks ago. I looked at the form. Richard's signature was at the bottom. He listed the house, the cars, and about $400,000 in investments. Rebecca continued, but according to my research, your household net worth is closer to $12 million, and that's before the severance package. He hid $11 million worth of assets that you earned, assets that are legally half yours, regardless of what these papers say. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. Your husband didn't just ask for a divorce. He tried to steal your life's work through fraud. I thought about Richard panicking when he saw the news, the 100-plus phone calls, the desperate plea to renegotiate. He thought if he got me to sign before the severance was announced, he'd lock in an agreement that gave him everything, and I'd be too embarrassed to fight it. That seems to be the plan. Yes. But the $50 million wasn't listed in the disclosure either, which means even if you had signed voluntarily and with full understanding, the agreement would still be invalid. He failed to disclose a $50 million asset that was already approved by your company's board. I felt something shift inside me. The grief and shock of the past 36 hours began to transform into something harder, colder. First, we filed to have the agreement voided. Fraud, duress, incomplete disclosure. We have multiple grounds. Second, we file a counterclaim for the actual division of assets. Rebecca's smile was predatory. By Connecticut law, I can argue for a significantly larger share for you based on economic contribution. You were the primary earner for over 3 decades. Richard was essentially a dependent. He won't like that. I'm sure he won't, but that's not my concern. She pulled out another folder. There's one more thing. Something that came up in my preliminary research. Credit card statements. Your name isn't on the account, but it was opened using your social security number as a secondary guarantor. It's been active for 8 years. I don't have any credit cards I don't know about. I know, but someone does. Rebecca handed me a statement. The billing address is an apartment in Stamford. The primary card holder is listed as Diane Crawford. I didn't recognize the name. Who is Diane Crawford? That's what I was hoping you could tell me. The card has a $30,000 limit. It's been maxed out and paid off repeatedly for 8 years. Total charges over that period are just under $200,000. $200,000 charged to an account tied to my social security number by someone named Diane Crawford. I've never heard of her. I didn't think you had. Rebecca pulled out a photograph. This is from the apartment building security footage. My investigator is very resourceful. The photo showed a woman entering a building lobby. She was maybe 40, blonde, well-dressed, carrying shopping bags from Nordstrom and Saks. Do you recognize her? I looked closer. Something about the jawline, the way she held her shoulders. I don't know. Maybe. She looks familiar, but I can't place her. My investigator ran her name through some databases. Diane Crawford is a real estate agent in Stamford. She's been licensed for 12 years. Rebecca paused. Before that, she worked as an executive assistant at Hartwell Industries from 2005 to 2012. Diane Marshall. That was her maiden name. She was my assistant for about 6 months before I promoted her to the marketing department. The memory came back sharp and unpleasant. I had to fire her in 2012. She was falsifying expense reports, nothing major but enough to warrant termination. And now she's living in an apartment paid for with your credit, shopping with a card tied to your name. I looked at the photograph again at the confident stride, the expensive clothes, the shopping bags. Richard's been paying for her for 8 years. It appears that way. Is she his? I couldn't say the word. My investigator is looking into that, but given the timeline and the financial arrangement, I think we can draw some preliminary conclusions. I set down the photograph. My hands weren't shaking. I was surprised by that. I thought they should be shaking. He has a mistress. My husband has had a mistress for 8 years, a woman I fired for stealing, and he's been paying for her with my money. That's what the evidence suggests. And my children knew. They must have known. That's why they applauded. That's a possibility we should explore. I stood up and walked to the window. Hartford spread out below me, anonymous and indifferent. Somewhere down there, people were living normal lives, marriages that worked, children who loved their parents, families that didn't conspire to destroy each other. Now we build the case. We document everything. The fraud, the hidden assets, the affair. We gather evidence that will be admissible in court. Rebecca joined me at the window. And then we take your husband for everything he has, which technically is everything you earned, so we're really just taking it back. My phone buzzed. I looked at it. A text from Brandon. Mom, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand. Dad's a mess. Then another from Melissa. You're being petty and vindictive. Think about the family. Think about the family that had ambushed me, the family that had applauded my humiliation, the family that had known about the affair. I turned off my phone. I want to know everything. I told Rebecca. Every detail of their plan. Every dollar Richard stole. Every lie my children told that can be arranged. But Mrs. Harper Evelyn, I have to warn you, the truth is usually worse than we expect. Are you sure you want to know everything I thought about my wedding day, about the birth of my children, about 36 years of believing I was building something good? I need to know, I said. I can't fight what I don't understand. Rebecca nodded. Then we'll start digging. I'll have preliminary findings within the week. That night, I moved out of the hotel and into a furnished apartment in downtown Greenwich. It was smaller than my closet at the house, but it was mine. No memories, no lies, no ghosts. I sat on the rental couch and looked at my phone. The text from Brandon and Melissa had been joined by others. Richard, please, Evelyn. Let's just talk. Brandon, this is ridiculous. You're tearing the family apart. Melissa, if you don't stop this, you'll never see your grandchildren. Grandchildren, Melissa's 2 children, ages 4 and 6. I'd been at both births. I'd paid for their preschool, their clothes, their birthday parties, and now they were being used as leverage. I didn't respond to any of the messages. Instead, I opened my email and started writing. Thank you for the referral to Rebecca Stone. She's already proven invaluable. I wanted to let you know that I'll be declining all media requests related to the retirement party video. I don't want to make this more public than it already is. However, I would appreciate any information you might have about my husband's knowledge of the severance package timing. Rebecca believes he planned the divorce to coincide with my phone rang a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered Mrs. Is Harper. A woman's voice unfamiliar but somehow recognizable. This is Diane Crawford. I think we need to talk. I gripped the phone tighter. Why would I talk to you because I know things about your husband that you don't? Things that could help you in court. A pause. And because I was used just like you were. I just didn't realize it until yesterday. I should have hung up. I should have called Rebecca and let her handle it. Not on the phone. Meet me tomorrow noon at the coffee shop on Greenwich Avenue, the one next to the bookstore. Another pause. And Mrs. Harper, you might want to bring your lawyer. What I have to tell you is going to change everything. I sat in my empty apartment holding my phone, staring at the wall. 8 years. My husband had been lying to me for 8 years, and tomorrow I was going to find out exactly how deep those lies went. Diane Crawford looked different in person than she had in the security footage, older, more tired. The confident stride I'd seen in the photograph was absent. She sat hunched over her coffee, eyes darting to the door every few seconds. Rebecca sat beside me, a legal pad and pen at the ready. We'd arrived early to secure a corner table away from the windows. "Thank you for coming," Diane said. She didn't offer to shake hands. "I know you must hate me." "I don't know you well enough to hate you," I said. "I just know you've been sleeping with my husband for 8 years while I paid for your apartment." Diane flinched. "That's fair. And for what it's worth, I didn't know about the credit card thing until last week. Richard told me the apartment was a place he kept for business. That's what he called it, our relationship." She laughed bitterly. "He was never going to leave you." "I knew that. I just didn't care at first. I saw the video, the retirement party. I saw what he did to you." Diane met my eyes for the first time, and I realized I wasn't special. I was just another asset he was managing, another line item in his portfolio of lies. Rebecca spoke for the first time. "Crawford, you said you have information that could help my client. What exactly do you know?" Diane pulled a folder from her bag. Inside were photocopies of documents, printouts of text messages, bank statements. "Richard and I met at a real estate conference 3 months after you fired me. He said he was married but unhappy. He said his wife was cold, obsessed with work, never had time for him." She slid the folder toward me. "Looking back, I think he targeted me specifically because of our history. He knew I'd have reason to resent you." I opened the folder. The first document was a text conversation. "Richard she'll never suspect. She's too focused on her precious career to notice anything." "Diane, what if she finds out Richard she won't? And even if she does, what's she gonna do?" "She needs me for appearances. The successful executive with the loving family. It's all part of her image. Richard, the kids are on board. Brandon's been wanting money for years. Melissa just wants to feel important. They'll help when the time comes. Diane help with what Richard, getting what we deserve. All 3 of us. The text was dated 2 years ago. He was planning this for at least 2 years, I said. Longer than that." Diane pointed to another document. "Look at this." It was a bank statement. An account I'd never seen at a bank I'd never used. Deposits going back 5 years, monthly transfers of $15,000 from an account labeled Harper Household. "Richard set up a shell account," Rebecca said, studying the statement. "He's been siphoning money for years, almost $1 million, Diane said. "I found this by accident. I was looking for the credit card statement to check a charge, and I found login credentials on Richard's laptop for this account and 3 others. Separate accounts for Brandon and Melissa. He's been paying them to stay loyal. $20,000 a month to Brandon, $15,000 to Melissa." I did the math. Over $300,000 a year for at least 5 years. $1.5 million to my children alone. They knew about the affair. They've known for years. Brandon walked in on us once at Richard's office, the apartment in Stamford. Richard paid him off. Diane's voice was flat. Melissa found text messages on Richard's phone 2 years ago. She demanded money to keep quiet. Richard agreed. I thought about my children. Brandon asking for more money every month, always with a new excuse. Melissa's lavish vacations, her designer wardrobe, the private school tuition for her kids that she claimed was covered by work. They were blackmailing their father. They were profiting from the affair. There's a difference, but I'm not sure it's a meaningful one. Rebecca was writing furiously. This is all admissible. Financial fraud conspiracy, potentially extortion. She looked at Diane. Why are you telling us this? You're implicating yourself. Diane laughed again. That bitter sound because I'm done. Richard called me yesterday after the news about the $50 million broke. He wanted me to help him convince you to tear up the divorce papers. He said we could start fresh once he had access to your money. I said no. And then he told me what he really thought of me. Diane's jaw tightened. 8 years. 8 years I wasted on that man. And he called me a useful distraction, said I was never anything more than a way to pass the time while he waited for the big payday. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. There's something else, Diane said. She pulled out one more document. This is the most important thing. It was a printout from what looked like a family group chat. The participants were Richard, Brandon, and Melissa. The date was 2 weeks before my retirement party. Richard, it has to be public. Maximum humiliation. She'll sign anything just to escape. Brandon, what if she reads the papers first? Richard, she won't. She never reads anything at parties. Too focused on mingling. Melissa, what about Mom's severance? Won't that complicate things? Richard's severance is capped at 2x salary, maybe $3 million tops. Not worth fighting over. The real money is the house and investments. That's what the papers lock in. Brandon. And if she gets a lawyer? Richard, by the time she gets a lawyer, the divorce will be finalized. I've got it timed perfectly. File on Monday, hearing on Wednesday. Quick and clean, Melissa LOL. She won't know what hit her. I read the messages 3 times. Each time they hurt a little less. Not because the betrayal was any smaller, but because I was getting used to the weight of it. They called you the cow, Diane said quietly. In other messages, time to milk the cow. The cow has no idea. Things like that. Diane hesitated. Are you sure? She pulled up another print out a separate conversation just between Brandon and Melissa. Melissa, can you believe she thinks we actually like her? Brandon, she's so desperate for a family that she'll believe anything. Pass the money, cow, and smile. Melissa, Dad says we should act sad at the party just for appearances. Brandon, I'll try not to laugh when he hands her the papers. Melissa, I'm gonna clap. She deserves it for all those years of making us feel like her career was more important than us. Brandon finally getting what's coming to her. I set down the printout. Pages more years of conversations. They've been planning this in one form or another since Richard stopped working. They just needed to wait for the right moment. Rebecca gathered all the documents into her briefcase. Crawford, would you be willing to testify to all of this in court? Diane nodded. I'll testify. I'll give depositions. I'll do whatever you need. She looked at me. I know this doesn't make up for what I did. I know I was part of the betrayal, but I thought you should know the truth because no one deserves what they did to you. Not even from a husband who never loved her, and not from children she sacrificed everything for. We sat in silence for a moment. The coffee shop bustled around us. Normal people, normal conversations, normal lives. One more question, I said. How did Richard know about my retirement date? The exact timing. The severance package wouldn't be announced until afterward, but he knew to file the papers right before Diane's face changed. Something passed through her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or resignation. He has someone at your company, someone who was feeding him information. I don't know her name, but Richard mentioned her a few times. Someone in HR, I think an old friend from college who owed him a favor. I thought about the people in HR, the faces I'd seen in meetings, the names on org charts. Someone had betrayed me from the inside, someone I might have trusted. I'll find out who Rebecca said. If there's a paper trail, we'll find it. I stood up. Diane stood too, clutching her bag. I'm sorry, she said, for everything. I didn't tell her it was okay. It wasn't okay. But I nodded, and that seemed to be enough. Outside, the October air was crisp and clean. Rebecca walked beside me toward her car. This changes everything, she said. We have evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and emotional abuse. Combined with the hidden assets and the staged humiliation, we're looking at a complete victory. What about criminal charges? Possibly. The financial fraud is significant. We'll need to talk to the state's attorney, but there may be grounds for prosecution. I stopped walking. We were standing on Greenwich Avenue, surrounded by expensive shops and expensive people living expensive lives. Somewhere in this town was the house I'd paid for the children I'd raised, the husband who had plotted my destruction. Do it, I said. All of it. The divorce, the countersuit, the criminal referral. I want them to lose everything. Rebecca studied my face. Even your children, I thought about the messages. The cow finally getting what's coming to her. The applause at my retirement party. They're adults. They made their choices. I started walking again. Now they can live with the consequences. Rebecca Stone's conference room looked like a war room. Whiteboards covered one wall filled with names, dates, and dollar amounts. A timeline of Richard's fraud stretched across another. Boxes of documents lined the floor. Let's review what we have, Rebecca said, standing at the head of the table. Her paralegal, a young man named David, sat ready with a laptop. Financial fraud. Richard siphoned approximately $2.7 million over 7 years through shell accounts. That includes the payments to Diane Crawford, to Brandon, and to Melissa. I looked at the numbers. Numbers I had earned dollar by dollar over 35 years. Asset concealment. The divorce papers he presented failed to disclose $11 million in assets. That's before the severance, which he also failed to mention, even though his contact at Hartwell had told him it was coming. Who was the contact, I asked. Sandra Wells, assistant director of HR. She and Richard went to college together. She's been feeding him information for years. Your schedule, your travel plans, even your performance reviews. Sandra. I barely knew her. We'd been in meetings together, exchanged pleasantries in the hallway. She'd smiled at me at company events while reporting my movements to my husband. Is she being charged? We're building a case. Breach of confidentiality. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Margaret Chen is handling the internal investigation. Sandra was terminated yesterday. Fraudulent inducement. Richard presented the divorce papers under false pretenses at a public event designed to pressure you into signing without review. The agreement is void on its face, so the divorce isn't final. It was never valid. You signed under duress without disclosure based on false statements. We've already filed to have it annulled. I felt something loosen in my chest. The papers I'd signed in that ballroom didn't matter. They never had. Now for the counterattack. Rebecca switched whiteboards. We're filing for divorce on your terms. Given Richard's demonstrated fraud, his concealment of the affair, and his conspiracy with your children, We're asking for 80% of marital assets. Connecticut law allows for unequal distribution based on economic contribution and conduct. You were the sole earner for over a decade. He was conducting a long-term affair with funds you earned. The court should be sympathetic. Rebecca's expression hardened. That's more complicated. They're adults. We can't include them in the divorce proceedings, but we can pursue civil action for the money they received, either as participants in the fraud or as recipients of stolen assets. They'll claim they didn't know the money was stolen. They'll claim a lot of things, but we have the messages. They knew about the affair. They knew about the plan. They actively participated in your humiliation. I thought about Melissa's text. If you don't stop this, you'll never see your grandchildren. She was using my grandchildren as weapons. What about Richard criminal charges? The state's attorney is reviewing the case. Financial fraud of this magnitude, especially against a spouse, is a serious offense. Combined with the conspiracy evidence, there's a strong possibility of prosecution. Rebecca handed me a document. But there's something else we need to discuss. Richard has hired a new lawyer, someone with more resources than his original counsel. I looked at the name Vernon Pike from a white shoe firm in New York. He can't afford Pike. He's paying with promises a percentage of whatever he can salvage from the marriage. Pike is gambling that he can find a way to access your severance. That severance is mine. I earned it. Of course it is. But Richard is arguing that the severance was a marital asset earned during the marriage. He wants half $25 million. I set down the document. He humiliated me and public stole from me for years, and now he wants half of what I earned. That's his position. Pike filed a motion yesterday to freeze your severance pending the divorce proceedings. The cold feeling was back. The one that had replaced the grief. He's trying. The hearing is next week. We'll fight it, obviously. But you should be prepared for a long battle. I stood up and walked to the window. Hartford spread out below gray and indifferent. What does Richard have really? What assets does he control? Rebecca consulted her notes. The house is in both your names, but the mortgage is almost paid off. You made the payments. Cars, same situation. Investment accounts are jointly held. Personal checking has maybe 50,000 teams. So he has nothing. Everything he has, I gave him. I turned back to face her. Then we don't just win. We take everything back. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I mean, we don't negotiate. We don't settle. We go to trial and we let the whole world see what he did. I walked back to the table. The video of the retirement party has 50 million views now. People already hate him. Imagine what happens when they see the text messages, the shell accounts, the 8-year affair. A public trial would be extensive and painful. I've already been humiliated in front of everyone I know. What's a few more strangers? Rebecca considered this. It's a valid strategy. Pike is counting on you wanting to keep this quiet. If you're willing to go public, it changes his calculations entirely. I'm willing. I'm done being ashamed of what was done to me. Then we prepare for trial. Every document, every message, every dollar he stole. We lay it all out and let a jury decide. I nodded. And in the meantime, we file our own motion for immediate sole possession of the marital home for exclusive access to the joint accounts and for temporary support from Richard based on the assets he's concealed. Richard paying me support. It's usually the other way around, but given the fraud, we have grounds. Rebecca smiled thinly. If nothing else, it will send a message. We spent the next 3 hours going through documents, every account, every transfer, every lie. By the end, I had a clear picture of the man I'd been married to. Richard Harper had never loved me. He'd used me from the very beginning. He'd stayed in the marriage because it was comfortable, because I paid for everything, because my success gave him status without effort. And when he saw a chance to take everything for himself, he'd taken it. One more thing Rebecca said as I was getting ready to leave. Brandon tried to call the office today. He wants to meet with you. What did you tell him? I told him any communication should go through counsel. He said it was personal and not about the case. Personal. As if anything between us could be personal anymore. Tell him I'm not interested. Are you sure he sounded different, less hostile? He helped plan my humiliation. He took money to spy on me. He called me a cow. I picked up my bag. I don't care how he sounds. That night, I sat alone in my rental apartment and looked through old photo albums, the ones I'd grabbed from the house before moving out. Brandon at 5, grinning at the camera, gap-toothed and joyful. Melissa at 7, her first dance recital, nervous and proud. The 4 of us at Disney World the year I got my first VP promotion. Christmas mornings, birthday parties, graduations. When had it changed? When had they stopped seeing me as their mother and started seeing me as their meal ticket? I didn't have answers. Maybe there weren't any. My phone rang, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Harper. A woman's voice, vaguely familiar. This is Sandra Wells from Hartwell, the leak, the traitor. I don't think we should be talking. I know, Her voice cracked. I wanted to apologize. What I did was wrong. Richard told me you were the one who was dishonest, that you were hiding money from him. I believed him. Why are you calling me? Because he called me yesterday after I was fired. He said it was my fault the plan fell apart. He said I should have warned him about the severance amount earlier. She laughed bitterly. He's trying to blame me for his failure. That sounds like Richard. I know things that could help your case. Things Richard told me thinking I was on his side. He has another account. One he hasn't told anyone about offshore in the Caymans. He was planning to move the money there as soon as the divorce was finalized. An offshore account. More hidden assets. Can you prove this? I have emails. He used my work computer once. I think he forgot to log out. I kept copies. I thought about Sandra, about her willingness to betray me for a man who'd manipulated her, about her willingness now to betray him for the same reason. Send the emails to my lawyer, Rebecca Stone. I will. And Mrs. Harper, I really am sorry. I hung up without responding. More evidence, more betrayal, more ammunition for the war to come. I sat down the phone and looked at the photo album still open on my lap. Brandon and Melissa, young and innocent, before they learned that their father was weak and their mother was useful. Next week, the hearing. Next month, maybe the trial. After that, I would build something new. Something that couldn't be taken from me because it wouldn't depend on anyone but myself. But first, I had to burn down everything I used to have. The Stamford Superior Courthouse was a brutal concrete building from the 1970s. No warmth, no charm, just institutional efficiency, perfect for what was about to happen. Richard sat at the defendant's table with Vernon Pike and 2 junior associates. He wore his best suit, the one I'd bought him for Brandon's wedding. He looked smaller than I remembered, like he'd deflated in the weeks since the retirement party. I sat with Rebecca and David, a stack of evidence boxes at our feet. The gallery was full. Reporters, spectators, a few people I recognized from the viral video. Someone was live tweeting. Judge Catherine Morrison took her seat. Mid-60s steel gray hair, a reputation for non-nonsense decisions. We're here on the matter of Harper versus Harper. Case number 2023 CV41. She looked at both tables. I've reviewed the motions and counter motions. Pike, you're seeking to freeze the respondents, Severance package, pending final divorce decree. Stone, you're seeking to void the original divorce agreement and award your client exclusive possession of the marital home. Is that correct? Both lawyers nodded. Then let's begin. Pike. Vernon Pike stood. He was 60, polished, the kind of lawyer who charged $1,000 an hour and was worth every penny. Your Honor, my client is seeking nothing more than fairness. The severance package in question, $50 million, was earned during the marriage. Under Connecticut law, it is a marital asset subject to equitable distribution, and the original divorce agreement signed voluntarily by both parties. My client presented the papers. Mrs. Harper reviewed and signed them. Any claim of duress is after the fact rationalization. Judge Morrison turned to Rebecca. Stone. Rebecca stood. Your Honor, I'll address the duress claim first. May I present Exhibit A? She handed a flash drive to the bailiff, who inserted it into the courtroom system. The screen lit up with the YouTube video. This is the moment my client was presented with divorce papers. Note the setting. A public retirement celebration with 200 witnesses. Note my client's expression. Shock, confusion, distress. Note the applause from the respondents' children. The video played. I watched myself receive the papers, sign them, leave. I watched my children clap. This is not a voluntary signing. This is an ambush designed to pressure and humiliate. Your Honor, Pike started. I'm not finished, Mr. Pike. Rebecca clicked to the next slide. This is the financial disclosure filed with the original divorce papers. It lists assets totaling $400,000. Our forensic accountants have determined the actual marital estate exceeds $12 million before the severance. Pike's face tightened. Harper failed to disclose $11 million in assets. By statute, this invalidates the entire agreement. Rebecca moved to the next slide. But it gets worse. This is a text conversation between Mr. Harper and his co-conspirators. The messages appeared on screen. Time to milk the cow. The cow has no idea. Harper, his children, and his mistress of 8 years planned this ambush for months. They discussed it explicitly, they joked about Mrs. Harper's ignorance, and they coordinated the timing to ensure she would sign before learning the true value of her assets. Objection, Pike said. Those messages weren't disclosed in discovery. They were provided by a witness who came forward after initial filings. I notified your office 3 days ago. Judge Morrison looked at Pike. Did you receive notice? Pike hesitated. We received a document dump, Your Honor. We haven't had time to review. Then perhaps you should have prioritized. Overruled. Rebecca continued. We also have evidence of ongoing fraud. Harper maintained hidden accounts for 7 years. Siphoning approximately $2.7 million, he paid his mistress's living expenses from these accounts. He paid his adult children substantial monthly sums to secure their cooperation in the scheme. Your Honor, this is character assassination. Pike said, my client's personal relationships have no bearing on asset division. I disagree, Mr. Pike. Judge Morrison said, when personal relationships involve financial fraud, they're directly relevant. She turned to Rebecca. Continue. Finally, Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Harper maintained an offshore account in the Cayman Islands with the explicit intention of hiding assets from these proceedings. I watched Richard's face as Rebecca presented the emails Sandra Wells had provided. The color drained from his cheeks. He whispered something to Pike, who shook his head grimly. Based on this evidence, we ask the court to void the original divorce agreement, award exclusive possession of the marital home to my client. Freeze all accounts in Mr. Harper's name pending investigation and refer the matter to the state's attorney for potential criminal prosecution. Judge Morrison made notes. Pike, would you like to respond? Pike stood slowly. His usual polish was fading. Your Honor, I request a recess to confer with my client. Denied. You've had weeks to prepare. Respond. Pike glanced at Richard, then back at the judge. My client acknowledges that the disclosure was incomplete. He's prepared to amend the filings and proceed with mediation. Mediation? Rebecca almost laughed. Your client committed fraud. He doesn't get to mediate his way out of it. That's for the court to decide, Miss Stone. Judge Morrison set down her pen. I've heard enough for today. I'm going to issue preliminary rulings pending full trial. The courtroom went silent. First, the original divorce agreement signed at the retirement party is void. The circumstances of its execution. Public ambush, emotional distress, incomplete disclosure render it unenforceable. Richard slumped in his chair. Second, Mrs. Harper is awarded exclusive possession of the marital home effective immediately. Harper has 48 hours to remove his personal effects. Pike started to object, but Morrison held up a hand. Third, all accounts in Mr. Harper's name, including the offshore account referenced in Exhibit H, are frozen pending further investigation. Harper may retain access to a supervised account for necessary living expenses, to be determined by this court. Your Honor, my client has no other income. Then perhaps he should have considered that before committing fraud. Morrison's voice was sharp. Finally, I'm referring this matter to the state's attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges. The pattern of deception presented here is deeply troubling. She gathered her papers. We'll reconvene in 30 days for preliminary trial procedures. Until then, both parties are ordered to maintain status quo on all assets. Harper, you would be wise to secure separate counsel. I suspect your interests and those of your children may soon diverge. She banged her gavel. Court adjourned. The gallery erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. I sat still watching Richard. He was staring at the table hands flat on the surface. Pike was talking at him, but he wasn't listening. He looked like a man who had just realized the ground beneath him was gone. Then he looked up. His eyes found mine across the courtroom. For 36 years, I had seen many versions of Richard's face. Charming, sullen, bored, occasionally kind, but I had never seen what I saw now. Hatred. Pure, undiluted hatred. He mouthed something. I couldn't hear it over the noise, but I could read his lips. I held his gaze. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. Not a warm smile, not a forgiving smile. The smile of someone who had been underestimated for the last time. Richard turned away first. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca steered me past the reporters to a waiting car. That went better than expected, she said once we were inside. Morrison is clearly on our side. The criminal referral is significant. Richard's lawyer will try to negotiate. He'll offer some kind of settlement to avoid trial. I don't want a settlement, I know, but we should at least hear what he offers. It might be useful for leverage. I looked out the window at the courthouse receding behind us. He looked at me like he wanted to kill me. That's fear. He's realizing he's going to lose everything. No. I shook my head. That was something else. Something worse. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Do you want me to request a protective order? I thought about it. Richard was many things, vain, selfish, greedy, but violent. I'd never seen him raise a hand to anyone, but then again, I'd never seen him plot to steal $50 million either. Yes, I said. Request the order. That evening, I drove to the house in Greenwich. The house I'd paid for decorated, filled with the artifacts of a life I thought was real. Richard's car was in the driveway. The 48 hours hadn't started yet. I didn't go inside. I just sat in my car looking at the facade. The perfect lawn, the perfect shutters, the perfect lie. My phone buzzed. A text from Brandon. "Mom, please, I need to talk to you. It's important." I typed a response, then deleted it. Another buzz this time from Melissa. "The kids are asking about you. They miss their grandmother." I didn't respond to that either. Instead, I started the car and drove away. Some bridges once burned couldn't be rebuilt. Some betrayals were too deep for forgiveness. I had spent 36 years building a family. Now I would spend whatever time I had left building something better, something that was just for me. 6 months later, spring had come to Connecticut. I stood at the window of my townhouse in New Haven watching the harbor wake up in the early morning light. Sailboats bobbed at their moorings. Joggers traced the waterfront path. Normal people living normal lives. I had a new normal now. The divorce was final. Not the one Richard had wanted, but the one he deserved. Judge Morrison had presided over a trial that lasted 3 weeks. Rebecca had presented everything: the fraud, the affair, the conspiracy. Richard's new lawyer, Pike, had dropped him when the criminal investigation began. Tried to salvage something, but there was nothing left to salvage. The final judgment awarded me 87% of marital assets. The house, the investments, the retirement accounts, all mine. Richard kept his clothes, his golf clubs, and a settlement of $180,000 that would have to last him the rest of his life. He'd cried on the stand, actually cried talking about how I'd neglected him, how my career had driven him into another woman's arms. The jury hadn't been moved. The criminal case came 2 months later. Financial fraud, conspiracy, tax evasion for the offshore accounts. Richard was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, eligible for parole after 18 months. Diane Crawford testified against him in exchange for immunity. So did Sandra Wells. They both seemed relieved to finally tell the truth, even if that truth destroyed the man they'd trusted. I didn't attend Richard's sentencing. I'd seen enough of courtrooms. My children were a different matter. The civil suit against Brandon and Melissa was settled out of court. They repaid the money Richard had given them, or what was left of it, and signed agreements acknowledging their participation in the fraud. No criminal charges at Rebecca's recommendation. They were adults who'd made terrible choices, but they hadn't crossed the line into prosecution. I hadn't spoken to either of them since the preliminary hearing. Brandon had tried multiple times. He'd sent letters, left voicemails, even showed up at my apartment once. I'd called security. Melissa hadn't tried at all. She'd sold her story to a tabloid instead. My monster mother. How Evelyn Harper destroyed our family. The article was full of lies, half-truths, and grievances manufactured from thin air. I didn't read past the headline. The grandchildren were harder. Sophie and Oliver, 6 and 8 now. I'd been at their births. I'd held them when they cried. I'd bought them books and toys and taken them to museums. Now their mother had taught them that Grandma was the villain. I grieved for them sometimes late at night when the townhouse was quiet. I wondered if they remembered me. I wondered what stories Melissa was telling them, but I couldn't save them by destroying myself. Someday, when they were older, they might seek me out. I'd be here. The phone rang. "Margaret Chen, are you watching the news?" I turned on the television. A business channel running a segment about corporate leadership, and the Evelyn Harper Foundation has just announced its largest grant, yet $5 million to support financial literacy programs for women leaving abusive relationships. I smiled. The foundation had been my project for the past 4 months, a way to use what I'd learned and what I'd survived to help others. "You're famous again," Margaret said, "but this time for the right reasons." "I don't want to be famous. I just want to make a difference. You're doing both. Have you seen the applications, women from all over the country telling their stories? You're giving them hope." After we hung up, I sat with my coffee and watched the harbor traffic. Boats coming and going, people starting their days. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Grandma Evelyn, this is Sophie. Mom doesn't know I'm texting. I miss you. Can I call you sometime? I'm using my friend's phone." I stared at the message for a long time. Sophie, 8 years old, sneaking behind her mother's back to reach out. I typed a response. "I miss you too, sweetheart. You can call me anytime." I thought about Melissa reading her daughter's phone, finding the messages, using them as more ammunition. I typed again, "I love you, Sophie. When you're older, I'll be here." I sent it before I could change my mind. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Melissa would find out and make things worse. But Sophie had reached out. She'd risked her mother's anger to contact me. That had to mean something. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw a young woman, late 20s, well-dressed, holding a briefcase. "Mrs. Harper, my name is Dr. Rachel Morris. I'm a researcher at Yale. I'm working on a book about financial abuse in marriage, and I was hoping, come in, Dr. Morris. I'll make some tea." We talked for 3 hours about Richard, about the marriage, about the signs I'd missed, and the ones I'd ignored, about the system that made it so easy for him to hide and so hard for me to discover the truth. "Your story is important," Rachel said as she packed up her recorder. "It shows that this can happen to anyone, even women who seem to have all the power. I had power at work. I never had it at home." I walked her to the door. That's what he counted on. "Do you regret any of it? The fight, the exposure, the trial?" And I thought about the question about the humiliation of the retirement party, the pain of learning the truth, the devastation of losing my children. "I regret that it was necessary," I said. "But I don't regret doing it. Some things are worth fighting for. Dignity is one of them." After she left, I returned to the window. The harbor was busy now, full of life and movement. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Sophie's borrowed phone. "I'll wait for you, Grandma. I love you too." I smiled. The first real smile in months. That evening, I attended a gala for the foundation. 100 donors, supporters, and journalists gathered in a ballroom in Hartford. Margaret was there, and Rebecca, and dozens of people I'd met since the divorce. I gave a speech, not about Richard, not about the trial, about moving forward, about building something new from the wreckage of something old. Every woman in this room knows what it feels like to be underestimated. I said to be seen as less than we are, to be told that our value comes from someone else's approval. I looked out at the faces watching me, some young, some old, all of them scarred in their own ways. But here's what I've learned. Our value comes from ourselves, from our choices, our resilience, our refusal to stay down when someone tries to push us there. I paused. The room was silent. I was married for 36 years to a man who saw me as a resource to be exploited. My children? My voice caught, but I pushed through. My children were taught to see me the same way, and when I stopped being useful, they tried to discard me. A murmur rippled through the crowd. But I'm still here, still standing, still building, and every woman who's been through something similar can do the same. It's never too late to reclaim your life. It's never too late to start again. The applause was long and loud. People stood. Some were crying. I stepped away from the podium and found Margaret waiting. That was beautiful, she said. It was true. That's different. Later driving home, I passed the exit to Greenwich. The exit I'd taken thousands of times heading to a house that was no longer my home. Instead, I kept driving north toward New Haven, toward the townhouse by the harbor, toward a life I was still building. In the morning, I would review grant applications. I would meet with my financial advisor. I would walk the waterfront and breathe the sea air and remind myself that I was free. And maybe someday I would receive a phone call from a granddaughter who remembered that her grandmother loved her. Until then, I would wait and work and live because that's what survivors do.